community in Britain and around the world about Britain and America's role in their country is generating a terrorist. Let me spell it out, as the Right Honourable gentleman who saved the government's bacon earlier this evening is now in his place. Let me spell it out. As we spent so many hours discussing anti-terrorism, we are making new terrorists in Britain with our policy towards Somalia, with our double standards, with our hypocrisy. I give way to the Honourable gentleman.
The Honourable gentleman has been very generous. Whilst the government of Ethiopia is not perfect, and indeed there are governments closer to home that aren't perfect, and it's absolutely right that human rights abuses by the Somali security services are fully investigated, does nevertheless he accept that if Ethiopian troops at this current time withdrew, that would create a security vacuum into which terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, would create mayhem in the Horn of Africa, a key and strategic location, and that would come back to haunt us.
But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I said in this House over there, when we recalled the House just a few days after the atrocity of 9/11, if you'll forgive me quoting myself, I said, if we handle this the wrong way, we'll make 10,000 new Bin Ladens. And we have handled it the wrong way. And we have made 10,000 new Bin Ladens. And the problem of Al-Qaeda in Somalia has been made worse by the Western intervention and the Ethiopian invasion. Far more people have been recruited to a narrow, fundamentalist, separatist, violent Islamism by our policy than ever would have been if that policy had never been formed. The Honourable gentleman obviously hasn't read this Amnesty International document. The Ethiopian forces are not providing security, they're providing mass murder and mass terror in the occupied Somalia. The refugee camps are full of 2 million people. No one can walk on the streets of Mogadishu. Channel 4's reporters were almost killed making their programme. Some of their team on the same vehicle with them were shot dead live on television while they were making... Well, the Honourable gentleman from a sedentary position says by Somalis. I don't know if they were by Somalis or by Ethiopians. The point is, the country has been plunged into utter lawlessness, and to pretend that the Ethiopian government is providing security in a country with whom security should never be mentioned in the same sentence is completely ridiculous. There may be a need for African Union forces. There may be a need for Arab League forces. And I hope, in conclusion, and I'm sorry, I apologise to the Minister for taking a minute more than I ought to, but I'll close on this point. There may be a need for other forces. This conflict is going to go on. I hope the Minister is not going to claim that the deal reached this week is any kind of deal for solving this problem, because the people who are doing the fighting are not involved in the deal. It would be like a peace process in the north of Ireland, which excluded the people who were doing the fighting. That's what's been reached with relation to Somalia in the last few days. So I'm grateful to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, even more grateful for the extra time that I got, and I apologise for my churlish point of order, which turned out to be entirely misconstrued. And I do hope that we get some answers from the Minister this evening.
Meg Munn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to reply to the member for Bethnal Green and Bow on this debate. I see this as an excellent chance to highlight how the Foreign and Commonwealth Office seeks to address a number of issues relating to Somalia. As my noble friend, the Minister for Africa, said in his statement this afternoon, we congratulate the Somali Transitional Federal Government and the Alliance for the Re-Liberation of Somalia on reaching agreement to the cessation of violence. This agreement was signed by both parties in Djibouti on Monday and has been witnessed by members of the international community. I wish to thank the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative, Amadou Ould Abdallah, on his continued efforts to mediate the talks between the parties which resulted in the agreement. This is a positive step, and we look forward to all parties fulfilling their commitment to cease armed confrontation. We are committed to work with the UN to support this process. Human rights issues in Somalia are long-standing and complex. They cannot be attributed to any one cause, and there are no easy or obvious solutions. Somalia is not like other countries. Serious violence, lack of governance structures and the deteriorating humanitarian situation have been ongoing for 17 years. Many in Somali society have been brutalised by years of violence. It is therefore often individuals, not answerable to any particular group or commander, who carry out abuses on their own initiative. This makes it even more difficult to prevent further abuses and to bring those responsible to justice. Given this complexity and the insecurity in Somalia, there is little opportunity to monitor the situation reliably or gather and verify facts or allegations. Reporting is often biased and may be exaggerated to exert influence on the international community. The only sustainable way to address human rights in the long term is to engage in effective state building, concentrating on developing institutions, parliamentary accountability, an inclusive security sector and delivery of basic services. Short-term fixes that don't focus on state building will mean we return to this issue year after year, prolonging the suffering of the Somali people. Reports of incidents and accusations of human rights abuses by Ethiopian troops are difficult to corroborate and have been categorically denied by the Ethiopian government. Ethiopian troops in Somalia are carrying out a role that security providers currently in Somalia do not have the capacity for. Many critics forget that fighting between militias has been going on for 15 years before Ethiopia intervened, at the invitation of Somalia's transitional federal government. African Union member nations have not yet committed to contributing sufficient troops to allow for full deployment of the African Union mission in Somalia, which currently has only 2,400 of the 8,000 troops mandated. Further planning for a possible UN mission was called for by UN Security Council Resolution 1814, although this is unlikely to be mandated soon. Evidence from other Ethiopian peacekeeping deployments indicates that they make a positive contribution to missions. Ethiopian troops are currently likely to form the largest contingent of the UN African Union mission to Darfur. We regularly engage with human rights organisations, listen to their views and appreciate their efforts to gather information and evidence on human rights. We and they fully acknowledge that allegations of abuse are made against all parties to the conflict in Somalia. We sponsored an area meeting in the United Nations in New York on the 31st of March to enable governments and the non-governmental organisation community to freely discuss human rights and humanitarian issues and exchange views on how to achieve progress in Somalia. And the Honourable Gentleman may be interested to know that in responding to a question from my Honourable friend, the Member for Stroud, I indeed said that we unreservedly condemn all proven incidents of human rights abuse and expect those responsible to face justice. My noble friend, the Minister for Africa, raised the issue of human rights in Somalia with the Ethiopian Prime Minister in late January 2008. Our ambassador to Ethiopia regularly raises respect for human rights in Somalia at senior levels of the Ethiopian government. Foreign Office and Foreign and Commonwealth officials in London and at the UN have also raised this issue with their Ethiopian counterparts. Ethiopia has told us that they intend to withdraw from Somalia and that they have reduced force numbers by more than half since late February 2007. The Ethiopian government is extremely positive about the newly signed peace agreement, which includes a strategy for their withdrawal from Somalia. Until Ethiopia withdraws its troops completely, we urge them to use only appropriate force, adhere to international humanitarian law and respect human rights. But for Ethiopia to withdraw from Somalia before an effective alternative force has been established would risk creating a dangerous security vacuum. Somalis would suffer the most from such a development. The UK is a leading contributor to world efforts to rebuild the Somali state. We support the efforts of the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative for Somalia to engage with civil society and to help bring about social and political reconciliation that will lead to greater respect for human rights and religious freedoms for all Somalis. Through helping to shape UN Security Council policy and our membership of the EU and the International Contact Group, we press for greater focus on human rights in Somalia. We asked the UN to enhance its capacity to monitor and report on the human rights situation in Somalia, and fully supported the Human Rights Council's resolution on the 20th of March to renew the mandate of an independent expert. Both UN Security Council Resolution 1814, unanimously adopted on the 15th of May, and the EU General Assembly and External Relations Council conclusions, adopted on the 26th of May, support the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, including the independent expert for Somalia, and encourage them to undertake a fact-finding and assessment mission to Somalia to address the human rights situation. We co-chair the donors group and are the second largest bilateral humanitarian development donor. We are also the second largest bilateral donor after the US for the African Union mission to Somalia. We are a key donor to the UN Development Programme effort to develop a full justice system, including providing, improving the police force, judiciary and penal system to an international accepted standard. I understand the Honourable Gentleman had thought that this issue was a matter for the Department for International Development. This policy area, I can confirm to him, is that of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We value human rights highly. No other states are as active as the UK on human rights issues in Somalia. We urge other states to join our efforts and encourage international human rights organisations to concentrate their advocacy activities on pressing other less active states for support too.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. Can everyone say aye? Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.